Started. Hello, very good morning, everyone. Welcome to the panel discussion. We thank you all for your valued time today to attend the panel discussion on the trends in privacy regulations and the role of data governance. My name is Mukesh H. Kanwani, and it's my privilege to be your moderator for today's panel discussion. Before getting started, let's look into key housekeeping notes. Today's session is scheduled for 45 minutes, which includes 10 minutes of question and answers. During the entire session, all the attendees will be in listen-only mode, but please feel free to put in your questions in the Q&A section, which is right below your screen, and we'll be sure to take it up in the last segment. Or we will also be able to reach out to you on email, one-on-one, answering your questions. A little bit more about myself. I head the business for CISA's Asia Pacific region, and I carry a total of 12 years of experience with IT and cybersecurity. I've been working very closely with organizations to help them be more cyber resilient. A quick introduction about CISA. CISA is a forensics-driven cybersecurity solution company having offices across the globe. We've been trusted by leading organizations to help them secure their businesses with robust preventive, detective, and corrective cybersecurity solutions. By taking a problem-first approach and leveraging its experience with being a PFI, which is a payment forensic investigators, we've been supporting 2,000 plus customers spread across 40 countries in helping them focus on their business growth and the business continuity by taking care of their cybersecurity challenges. You can always visit our website, www.cisainfosec.com, to know more about us. It's my privilege to introduce you to the panelists for today's discussion. First up, we got Ms. Mel Migrino. Ms. Mel is the chairman and the president at Women in Security Alliance Philippines, and she also holds a key role as a regional director of information security and regulatory alliances for Southeast Asia with Gogoluk. Ms. Mel carries 20 plus years of combined experience in cyber and IT governance, and she also holds key roles with associations such as the CIO Association, Philippine CIO Association, and the Asian CIO Association. Thank you so much, Ms. Mel, for gracing this occasion.
Thank you.
Next up, we got Mr. Yukon Cheng. Yukon is the Regional Vice President of Asia Pacific with PCI Security Standards Council. Yukon carries 20 plus years of experience in risk management and payments and cybersecurity. In his past stint, Yukon has worked with Visa's Asia Pacific risk management team, and he supported clients on risk mitigation. Thank you so much, Yukon, for gracing this occasion as well.
Thanks, Mukesh.
We also got Prabhu Narayanan. Prabhu is the Vice President of Data Security and Governance Division at CISA. Prabhu carries 20 plus years of experience in both IT and cybersecurity, and 16 plus years of exclusive experience on cybersecurity domain itself. In his past stint, Prabhu has worked with companies such as IBM, Cognizant, Wipro, Aflac, and VOY. Thank you so much, Prabhu. Thanks for joining in today.
Thanks, Mukesh. Morning, friends. Good to know you.
All right. Just to set the context over here on today's panel discussion. Today, our panelists will be exploring more on different popular data regulations, how they have evolved, the role of data governance, data classification, and also we'll try and help you understand how to build a robust cybersecurity and a data governance framework to meet all the requirements is one, and also to be future-proof. With that, let's quickly jump into the panel discussion. All right. So we being a responsible cybersecurity company, we come across a lot of questions from our clients and the markets of the organization in terms of data governance. So I would like to ask Ms. Mel, if you could give us an overview on how has the journey of data governance evolved among organizations in the Southeast Asian countries?
Okay, so actually, first of all, good morning, everyone. Thank you, Mukesh, for the question. So I guess in the earlier days, data governance was strictly considered a technology-oriented work, primarily to organize and classify data. So it's like having your data catalog across the organization. And this has been like this for, I guess, decades. And when the respective in-country data privacy laws were formed and started its implementation, so enterprises started to put some risk management practices into their data, like the Information Assets Registry, analyzing CIA values vis-a-vis with the legitimate use of data and appropriate controls needed. And then when the pandemic kicked in, we saw that enterprises mastered their efforts to accelerate digital transformation. And we saw that data sits at its core in making business decisions. Organizations realized they could extract more value from the different data sets that they have. And I guess this somehow relates to what they are saying, such as the data governance 2.0, which is actually anchored on the modern and anchored for modern and data-driven business. Now, in this time, enterprises are evaluating, like post-pandemic, right? So enterprises are actually evaluating how to make better use of their data to practically stay ahead of the game. So this evolution of data governance is anchoring on data intelligence that has the ability to actually transform your data into knowledge. Data intelligence practically will be your connecting point for all of your data elements within your data management system to deliver information and insights that will help improve CX, customer experience, and of course, put forward more innovative process improvements initiatives, and of course, ultimately affect your bottom line. So those are my thoughts, Mukesh.
Sure, Ms. Mel. I think very insightful. I'm sure it helped us understand on how the journey of data governance has evolved. Thank you so much, Ms. Mel. Thanks for taking that up. Now, slowly drifting from data governance to popular standards. We see standards have been mandatory in a lot of organizations. A few standards have been very new to organizations. So, I would want to understand from Mr. Yukon, from the history of his experience, on what are the popular standards among financial institutions and their importance for an organization.
Thanks for the question, Mukesh. I guess, first of all, good morning, everybody. Nice to see some familiar names and many names of people I've not yet met before. Thank you to CISA for hosting today's panel discussion. I think it's a really relevant conversation. And answering your question, Mukesh, based on my conversations with compliance and cybersecurity leaders, I don't think any one of them would consider standards being particularly popular, given that it is something that they must stay on top of. Otherwise, they are not going to get a contract, given that some of the standards are requirements to get the engagement. Or for some of the PCI standards, there are legal obligations to be compliant with, right? So I'm not sure if popular is the right word. Having said that, I think adopting a globally established standard like PCI DSS will help to provide better peace of mind to an organization stakeholders, both internally as well as externally. Now, this is because if a standard is adopted correctly, as it is intended, an organization's top leaders, their board of directors, will know that the organization is secure, not based on guidelines that it's just put together based on experts within the bank, but it is based on guidelines that is put together by experts from all around the world. Now, a common misconception about PCI standards is that it was drafted by a group of Americans locked away in a room who have no idea what's going on in Asia. And that cannot be further from the truth. PCI standards, PCI DSS as a more recent example, is a truly global standard. It was developed by stakeholders all around the world, including experts, of course, from PCI Council. It includes experts from the PCI community, the payment networks who form the PCI Expo, And many cybersecurity experts are represented, and they have provided thousands of feedback for PCI DSS alone. Of course, this was done over 3 requests for comments or RFCs, but we received over 6,000 feedback items for this one standard alone. And of course, this also includes our host, CISA, who is one of our representatives within the PCI Global Executive Accessor Roundtable, or GEAR. This is a key group within PCI where we actively get feedback, ask for feedback, and also to share initiatives with our PCI GEAR members. So they actually have then this forum to also provide insights on maybe specific challenges about the standards and how the standards can be improved. Now, I want to use the opportunity to highlight that PCI is a standards body. We look after the standards, and we spend a lot of time to make sure that the standards remain relevant. We are fully mindful that a standard that is irrelevant, that doesn't support the industry, that doesn't remain current, is useless, right? You comply with PCI standards because of your legal obligations to the payment networks. If you are a merchant, you have a contract with your acquirer. If you are an acquirer, you have a contract with one of the payment networks, or all of them. Now, just circling back very quickly on how this helps, how the standards help to stay on top of emerging trends. We constantly get feedback, as I mentioned, to make sure that the standards remain relevant. Okay, security threats evolve, the standards have to evolve, and we rely a lot on our PCI community, right? And all of you can look to becoming a PCI community in order to then provide feedback and improve the security standards, especially for PCI, where many of you will probably have to adopt them. Mukesh, back to you.
Sure. I totally agree with you, Yukon. I think while you touched upon the standards of PCI DSS that is built, right? PCI compliances which are built. I see a lot of thought to process going in there to build standard which helps organization to be more relevant as well. Thank you so much, Yukon. Thanks for taking up that question. All right. Moving ahead, one other thing that we also realized is the regulations of different regions. How are they working in tandem with global regulations, right? So we also want to understand more on how are the regulations in the Southeast Asia working in tandem with other global regulations. Prabhu, if you could help us out with your insights on this particular question.
Definitely, Mukesh. Thanks for that. And it's my privilege to share the day with Yukon, Mel, and my team, as well as the friends who have joined in. A very good morning. So effectively, dwelling onto that question, if you really look at it, from the Singapore region, primarily the PDPA Act, which has been the base that has been laid out for the ASEAN region, because I feel the ASEAN framework related to the data governance and data privacy has been, to a large extent, adapted from that. Yeah. So effectively, I see a good amount of thought process gone into it, where it talks about the data controllers, it talks about the data processors, it talks about the cross-border regulations. So a deep thought and a well-defined process with respect to the PDPA regulation has been provided from the Singapore Act. And the good thing about it is the ASEAN's community for defining the framework and the act also adapted to that, where they could see in the value that's being brought out, because Singapore being a part of the ASEAN community as well. So definitely there's a, to second Yukon's thought process, it's a community of people where the thought process gets brainstormed, and whatever is good for the team or whatever is good for the enterprise and for their country, so that the ease of business can be done, gets put forth, as well as while securing their environments as well properly, so that it could be adaptable and it is not too stringent, because just on the lighter side to what you said, compliance is something which people find very difficult to adapt to. Yeah, because it puts in a lot of stringent controls, but the ROI of the compliance you realize when you're branding of your enterprise, or when there is a security breach or attack that's happening and your enterprise is being secured because of the good compliance processes and the security controls that you have adapted in. That gives in the branding, and that actually helps the nations as well to progress, because primarily everything is business oriented here, right? So effectively that helps out. And drawing parallels to what the ASEAN community has gotten, if you really look at it from the Canadian region for the cross-border, they have a PIP, PDA type of a compliance already put forth. US has got a lot where there is a globalization of the standards. PCI itself is actually from that community, which got evolved and spread across, because good things get adapted by the people. Yeah. So effectively, if you really look at it from the US region, if you talk about NIST is there. NIST framework talks about from basically how the public data to be disclosed to the defense data with the Article 853 to be how it is supposed to be secured. 860 talks about your basically unclassified data. There are other details related to sensitive, confidential. So effectively, they have got proper standards that are defined for your commercial purposes, for your personal purposes. If you really look at it from the HIPAA standards, if you really talk about it, it's more from the health records, right? So they do have varied type of standards. ISO also talks about your infrastructure standards that are supposed to be adapted to. So effectively, if you really look at it, there are a lot of good process and thoughts that could be taken out from the NIST FIPS type of a framework for protecting your data. When you talk about ISO for your infrastructure and varied security controls that you talk about. Coming slightly moving towards the European region, if you talk about GDPR as a very good standard, where they again evaluate every member and they say like if they have acquired provided credentials for qualifying as acquirer, then they give you that detail so that you can have the data moved from cross-border related transfers, because they are very stringent about it. So effectively, so GDPR has been a standard from the European region for protecting, securing the European data, localization of the data, regular policies, and all that. And if you really look at it, it has got a lot of similarities to the PDPA, because that's why I said like PDPA, your NIST standards, your GDPRs, everything holistically. If you really look at it, it looks as almost like it's the same community which is thought through, and they have customized it for their business growth and customized it particularly to their region, because the local laws and regulations adapt differently. Similarly, if you look at China and other regions, you've got the CSL, DSL type of the frameworks that they have put in, which are very more stringent from their economy perspective, and that their community has got a lot of stringent regulations put forth into it. Coming to India, if you talk about, I could see a lot of good similarities that has happened from your, good adaptations from your NIST frameworks, PDPAs, and other related aspects, where India had come up with a DPDP rule, where it's a Data Protection Act that they came up with right now, digital protection of personal data and all that, right? So effectively, it is in line to the IBI IRDA guidelines, where similarly for the other regions also, you do have your basic security communities and the banking communities defining certain rules and regulations so that for the ease of business and others. But one good thing that I have seen in the PDPA related rules is like from the Singapore region, I could see that if a person wants his personal data not to be disclosed, that consent management type of activity has been laid out in the 2013-14 timeframe itself from their side. While in India, if you really look at it, the personal data information is accessible to everybody. And the good thing is, like with the DPDP rule that has come into the play, now they're talking about consent management, sharing of data and all. So effectively, that do not disturb type of a mode where your personal data without your consent cannot be shared across the local regions or across the borders wasn't that stringent in the Indian region per se. But now with the DPDP rules that are coming in, which is, I would say, like again, the DPDP rule from our side, in the Indian side, has taken all the good leads from the NEST frameworks, PDPA frameworks, and the ASEAN frameworks, and then they have adapted it and it is into the role. So which I'm happy that opens up a lot of secured way of doing business, along with the PCI adaptations that we have already got, and the Data Protection Act. Similarly, I mean, I hope similar type of rules and regulations in the Indian regions are coming in for like the HIPAAs for the healthcares and for the other related industries. If it could be made forth, that actually would be a good boom for the Indian market, while the other regions like the Singapore, ASEAN, and other regions are slightly ahead of us in that way, where these rules have been formed. And I mean, I would say at least like 3-4 years they are ahead of us with respect to the formation of the rules and adaptation of those rules. So that would be my thoughts, Mukesh. Thanks for that opportunity.
Sure, Prabhu.
Mukesh, if you don't mind, can I just add to that point? I think it's something that's very close to my heart.
No, you can. Please, yes.
Now, just making a reference to global regulations and referring to a global standard like what PCI helps to manage, this standard, as I mentioned, is a truly global standard, given that we have incorporated feedback from all around the world, right? And for those of you who are either developing regulations within your country, or even for organizations where, I guess I'm pushing the word regulation, but really internal corporate policies to adopt PCI, okay? Some of the best practices that I like to share with some of these role model companies across Asia Pacific, they have adopted, rather than developing their own cybersecurity standards, you can't know everything, right? They have adopted the PCI standards. And remember, the PCI standards are free for everybody to download, right? It is part of PCI Council's mission to secure payments account data globally, right? And anyone around the world is welcome to download PCI DSS free of charge. For some of the standards, at most you will have to agree to some terms and conditions. But PCI DSS is entirely free, right? So some of these organizations and also some of the regulators in Asia Pacific, right? After reviewing PCI DSS, instead of reinventing the wheel, they have adopted PCI DSS. There is a law in Japan, if you're not aware, that actually supports the implementation of PCI DSS. And there have been references by the RBI as well. Having said that, there may be additional considerations. And these role model companies that I told you, they have implemented policies within their company to adopt PCI DSS, but beyond payments. They recognize that sensitive data in payments is just as sensitive if I'm trying to protect other confidential information that may be covered under the privacy regulation, right? So they have then expanded the scope as part of their own policy. So this is outside the scope of PCI DSS, right? But they have implemented a policy to say, everybody in my organization will adopt PCI DSS. In addition, this is my additional policy where I also want to secure, in this example, transaction history. He told me customer name, customer address, and so on, right? So other information that is generally considered private, they have also used PCI DSS as a way to secure sensitive data. And we know PCI DSS works, right? And I'll draw something to you in case it doesn't stand out as clearly as it should. The next time there's a data breach, see how quickly the organization quickly stands up to say, no payment account data affected, right? And the reason why they state that is very simple. They don't want to get into trouble with Visa. They don't want to get into trouble with MasterCard and all of the other global networks. MAS will probably leave them alone because no financial data was touched, and so on, right? But that also suggests PCI DSS does work. Okay? Sorry for the interruption. Back to you, Mukesh.
I think amazing points put forward, Yukon. Thank you so much, Prabhu and Yukon, for touching up certain pointers on the regulations in tandem with global regulations. Just to add upon what Yukon mentioned, I think the best part of PCI compliance again is they are there's a lot of leeway in terms of the nature of business, right? Like what Yukon mentioned, it's over and above payments as well. So if any company wants to secure the environment, basically, if it's not just card data, but also within the privacy part of it, you're free to use the standards. Thank you so much, Yukon, for touching upon that point. One follow-up question for Prabhu. Well, Prabhu, you touched upon different regulations of from different regions, whether it's from Southeast Asia or whether it's on a larger perspective of Asia Pacific or global regulations. Uh, is there any similarities of certain regulations which are commonly used in across regions?
So, I mean, if you could just provide more clarity on that question, Mukesh, it would help because I don't want to dilute the query that you're asking me. So, I mean, what is your specific question on that? Similarity.
Yeah. So you spoke about GDPR, you spoke about PDPA laws. You said that there are certain similarities, certain standards are being taken, used in different standards, right? Certain requirements. So is there a similar requirements taken from each standards and implemented, Prabhu?
Definitely, definitely. Thanks for that. If you really look at it, the PDPA standards, the PIDEA standards of the Canadian region, the NIST frameworks, and if you talk about your DPDP, all this talk about cross-border data transfers. Yeah, GDPR primarily. Which was primarily adapted for that, right? The GDPR came into rule because the European data, the Union understood that they cannot have the data moved out. And if it is being moved out, what is the security control that's being put in? So this cross-border transfer of the data becomes a prime focus and prime importance because of the business needs, primarily, when you're doing it, and the commercial needs, right? So effectively, that's where, like, if you talk about the PCI standards being adapted globally, or if you're talking about the GDPR standards with the regulations, if within the EU region, what it needs to be, and if it is across the borders, right? As I said, that there is a acquirer type of certification that they adapt from the EU regions and all, right? For as per the GDPR rules, they have to be authorized, and they do have certain formalities that are being looked at. So effectively, the PDPA Act from the Singapore region and the ASEAN framework also talks about the cross-border transfer of the data with certain compliances that needs to be met in. And it actually differs because region to region, there is a localization of the laws. And so effectively, the legal departments work with them closely in framing the framework. But the generic adaptation, what I was talking about is, like, if you talk about PCI standards, you talk about GDPR anywhere, the prime need of it is, like, you need to know where your data resides first, right? So effectively, you talk about the data discovery type of a detail, how we are going to do that. And then you need to know, like, your data lineage, from where it comes, how the data flows, right? So effectively, these are some of the adaptations that are common across all the security practices that you talk about. Once you know the data, what is it you're going to do next with it? You have to classify it, to label it, you have to protect it, right? So effectively, so the classification part and type of the protection, that's where the NIST frameworks, FIPS, related frameworks, and the certain other protection rules like anonymization, pseudonymization, tokenization with respect to the PCI standards that Yukon has been talking about, or masking, truncation of data, everything comes into the play, right? So with respect to the protection aspect of it, but classification, again, yes, it's a common factor that crosses through. Every region will have its own ways and trends of naming conventions, the rule segments that are applying to it, and how we are doing it. So effectively, if you talk about, that's why in my initial statement itself, I said there are a lot of commonalities because it's a community. Say, for example, if NIST has thought about a good process of a community of people have come through and they have invested, say, for example, the PCI standards, when the community has already made that investment, brainstorming, taken the good knowledge out of it, and when the other regional communities are looking into it, right? If it can be customized for their needs, definitely they could do that. Or if it can be taken as a whole, for example, the PCA standards, the NIST standards, the FIP standards, they are like globalized data, so that the cross border communication of the data is made easy, and the transfer of the data is made easy, because that's a key for your businesses, right? The movement of data from one region to the other becomes a key for it. So effectively, so these are some of the best practices, and these are some of the global standard policies that has been already thought through. And when the regions looked into it, they felt, I mean, yeah, this can be suitable for my region. I can adapt to it. Definitely, people have taken adaptation to that. If they feel that there has to be some tweaks here and there because of their legal commitments and regulations, then they have gone ahead and they have tweaked it and they have put forth. But overall, holistically, if you really look at it, I could see a lot of similarities with the way the PDPA rule has been defined, to the GDPR rule has been defined, to the NIST, PIPDA, DPDP rules, all that. If you talk about all of this, talks about discovering your data, classifying your data, maintaining the asset inventories with you so that you know where your data is residing, the data lineage is being looked at, till the data. So, I mean, in short, everything revolves around data. And that is where the data governance type of a perspective, which we are talking about, becomes a key. And Mel and Yukon are experts who can actually even talk, throw in more light about it. But if you really look at it, as I said, it's a community of people who have thought through this and they have adapted it to their local regions. But there is almost similarity on all the rules that are being looked into, and it's basically that implementation time and the time when the bills have got passed is what varies because of their own local regional related constraints that they might have had at that point of time. While NIST was published, FIPS was published a very long back, PDPA came in 2013-14 range, while in the India, the DPDP rules that you're talking about is coming in sometime around 2022 to 23 range, even though we started this process in 2013. Because of the local regional policies and all, we got delayed into it. GDPR came in 2008, 2009 timeframe. So effectively, the time varies, or maybe it could be that people were looking at it on how it is getting adapted, how it is beneficial for their regionals before the other regions could get adapted to it and get benefited out of it. Yeah, so that would be my thoughts, Mukesh.
No problem. Thank you. Thank you so much for briefing it out to us. Really helps. All right. Now that we spoke about data governance, different standards and regulations, let's touch upon a bit more on data discovery and classification. What roles are they playing in the market? Right? How have they been evolving across from the past 6 months to 1 year? Prabhu, would you want to talk a bit more on this, because you've been working very closely on data discovery and classification itself? So your thoughts on this?
Definitely. See, I mean, as in the previous statement also when I was making it, if you really look at it, all the rules that you talk about can be applied when you know that when the enterprise or the region knows where the data is present permanently, right? So effectively, that's what we call as data discovery. So there are varied tools, varied appliances, varied ways that you could do about it. And similarly, when you talk about, once you know where the data resides, for example, in the PCA standards also, like if you talk about the sensitive data, where it resides, because protecting all the data is immense, because security controls do also have take time. It consumes time. So effectively, instead of trying to protect holistically, it's better you know which data to protect, like the sensitive data and all. That's where the classification plays a role for you to say which is sensitive, which is not sensitive to you, because protecting your public data doesn't make any sense to anybody. Yeah. So effectively, so the classification part of identifying what is your sensitive data, it could be with respect to the region, enterprise, or to a business, right? So that's where your data discovery plays a critical role. And then classification comes into the play, where you classify the data, label the data, so that you know whether this data can be spread across without, can be sent across without any regulations, or it needs to be protected, it needs to be secured before you could send it out and all that. So that's a two related details. And the people have taken it one step ahead, where right now people are talking about data lineages, data flows, data protections. And with respect to cross-border, that's when you talk about cross-border data, machine readable format to avoid man-in-the-middle attacks and all that. That's where the PKI infras and everything came into the play, right? So, but the data is of primary importance to you, and anything that you do to govern and secure that data is what all this classifications, discoveries, lineages, data flow diagrams, and all that talk about, right? So that you know where your data is, and you know whether your data is actually sensitive or it is going to be, it is publicly viewable. Yeah. So that's where it is. It is across all regions. All rules actually talk about it.
Abu, if I can also add, sounds like I'm adding to all your questions because you get all the fun questions. So I think, in terms of data discovery, it's such an important part of data governance, right? Mm-hmm. And especially when you consider that you can only secure the data assets, the private data, if you know where they are, right? And just drawing an analogy, right? Assuming that you own a large resort in Florida, you may not know that you have top secret information within the toilet. How do you know that you then need to assign special security to safeguard those top secret information in the toilet, right? So it is really important then to have a strategy to then scan your environment. And part of the reason why is to make sure that as you go through the security assessment, you are then scoping your environment properly, right? And that's one of the key challenges when entities are deciding to go through PCI DSS, right? And I've gone through PCI DSS assessments myself, right, in my past experience. And I can understand that there is a direct cost, right? The more that you cover, the more you have to pay, right? But having said that, if you don't do the scoping correctly, it is a possibility then that the attackers may get into your environment through an environment that isn't secure, right? And we've seen examples of data breaches that have happened, and completely understand the cost and benefit of including a larger environment. But it's such a critical part of data discovery. And just calling out a couple of points for classification. So I used to look after the enterprise risk program for Visa when I was working for them. And classification is really just a simple way of, I guess, number one, categorizing the types of data that you have, and then building a program around, right? Whether is this an internal use only document, or is it a top secret document that cannot be ever stored on a portable device, for example. Or if it's a top secret information, that it must be encrypted at all times. Okay, and the last point I'll mention about this is for the latest version for PCI DSS version 4, there is a call out to revalidate the scope. Now, this is not revalidating your compliance, yeah? So your revalidation of compliance is dependent on the payment networks that you have a legal obligation to, right? That remains. But as part of PCI DSS version 4, in addition to you providing your compliance, there is also a call out for you to revalidate your scope annually, right? And this is really to make sure that the scope, right, the data that you have in your environment remains current and your full infrastructure is secure from the bad guys who's trying to access your data assets. Mukesh, back to you.
No, thank you. Thank you so much, Yukon and Prabhu, for shedding light on this. I would also like to ask Ms. Mel on your additional point of view on this subject of classification and data discovery. Ms. Mel?
Okay, so I guess coming off from what the two panelists mentioned earlier, I would want to give it actually a different flavor. So actually, based on my experience, so both data discovery and data classification are part of the data governance. So as such, these key aspects of data governance are practically integral. it's actually a key part when you do your daily workflows that's being done by your data team. So when we discover and classify data, we need to consider the shift left approach or principle. So maybe to some of you who are actually from the tech teams, the shift left could be actually a familiar term where we consider aspects of privacy, accessibility, data quality, data protection, vis-a-vis information security into each key business process from the start to end. And as we know, if you look at your key business process, there is also a mapping vis-a-vis your whole data life cycle. So the beauty about the shift left approach, so it's similar to the DevSecOps, right? Wherein you do your due diligence, you put in appropriate cybersecurity controls at the start of the development. So basically as early as planning, right? And then the moment that you do analysis, design, and so forth. I guess on the perspective of data governance, the shift left approach also adapts more or less the same flavor. So the data governance won't be an afterthought to data, and of course in terms of your analytics infrastructure and use cases. So from the moment that you conceptualize, you need to think of what are those applicable data protection controls. How do you ensure integrity, quality of the data? And of course, depending on which country you operate in and which country you actually, transact. So you need to consider respective data privacy laws in terms of data location. Let's say if there is a need to, transfer the data from one country or from one location going to the next. And this one actually coincides with your overall data life cycle. So let's say if you look at your data life cycle, let's take for example the phase wherein you need to store the data, right? So usually we do it, so before it's really more of data warehousing that we actually keeps on hearing, and then at some point it evolved to like a data lake. So if that is the case, then very specific to the store phase or storage phase of your data life cycle. So you need to think through, like, first is which country do you operate and which country do you need to actually do the transaction. Why? Because you need to identify what are those data protection controls. So it could be from a legal perspective, it could be also from a technical perspective as well, that you need to communicate with your cybersecurity teams, technology teams, legal, as well as your business teams, or practically your sponsors, right? You also need to know what are those in terms of data accessibility, what is the governing access control rules or policies that should be in place. And then you should also have a mechanism on how to ensure consistency. How do you make sure that the data is actually trustworthy? And this exercise you need to do, right, across your data life cycle, and then you need to map it with your key business processes within the organization. Yeah, thank you.
Ms. Mel, thank you so much for that insight. Well, got great insights from the industry leaders, starting from you, God, Ms. Mel, Prabhu. And I think just to add to and just to echo on what was mentioned, today data is very important. And I think every organization should take proper measures to have right set of data discovery and classification solutions to ensure that the data is well protected. Thank you so much. We got one last question on the panel for the panelist. This is a very critical question, and I'm sure a lot of organizations and CISOs would want to know on how to build a robust and future-proof data governance framework. We would want to hear from all the three panelists on your thoughts on this. It would be very insightful for us. Ms. Mel, if you would want to start.
Yeah, so okay, so I'm smiling because of the future proof. Maybe as a cybersecurity practitioner, I don't believe in anything that is future proof. Sorry about that. But anyway, echoing from my previous sharing, I would like to give emphasis on the shift left approach, where the aspects of security, compliance, data management, privacy, data stewardship are actually key principles. So with this, it makes data consistent, and it doesn't get misused, and you can rely more on the data analytics to help optimize the your operations as well as your day-to-day decision making. So I guess some practices could be done, of course, aside from defining your vision, your goals in terms of establishing data governance, and then aside from also doing a gap assessment, which I believe is actually a key starting point, so that you would know what are your loopholes, what are your issues, and you also get to actually prioritize it vis-a-vis alignment with the business owners. So I guess other things would be you need to let's say define who has the authority to access the data, use the data, as well as do the data exchange and transfer. So you need to make it clear who has that authority or authorities within the organization. So you can do some sort of like a vetting process as well. So this type of strategy to be effective, there must be an individual, an authorized individual or group that oversees its overall development and implementation. So normally, it's actually a joint effort of your cybersecurity team. Others, they call it information security team, vis-a-vis your data privacy and your data governance team. So it really depends. In some other organization, the data the data governance teams actually reside within the technology function, but it could be more on the specific to processing. But I guess the way that we do it, it has to be a collection of different experts within the organization. And then the other thing would be to maintain a strong identity governance. So people and processes are actually could be your biggest assets, but it could also be your weakest link, as we all know. So make sure that we have the right individuals, the vetted resources or individuals would have appropriate level of access in order to perform their roles and responsibilities effectively. This, the last one that I would want to share is the implementation of data standardization. So this begins with solid standardization of your data across the organization, wherein representatives or champions across the different functions in your organization must regularly actually convene a governing body to agree on the definitions, use cases, as well as what are the acceptable changes, as well as access control policies that governs in your different data sets that sits within your enterprise. Why? Because data is part of your organizational systems. So having said that, there must be a lot of integrity, transparency, and data has to be synchronized as well. I mean, we cannot afford like, like a customer data, right, would have, different value, different format as coming from your sales department as compared, to your, let's say, to your billing department, or vis-a-vis if you have your IT department. So there has to be consistency, and data has to be regularly updated, or as much as possible, there has to be a real-time update across. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you so much, Ms. Mel. Very insightful. Yukon, your recommendation on this?
Yeah, well, I think it's such an important part, right? And while I understand what you're saying about being future-proof now, I think it is important to consider the current trends, right? To make sure that whatever standards remain relevant, and it is a key part as we build PCI DSS, as we revise PCI DSS, it was one of the key goals that we took into consideration, to take into consideration the security needs, the current security needs, what we can see on the horizon, and to make sure that that is incorporated into the current version of PCI DSS version 4, right? Of course, we don't do this alone, as I've mentioned, right? We do this with the PCI community. We do this with our board of advisors from the community, our GEAR members, so CISA I've mentioned. Our participating organizations are a key part of this input where we saw. And of course, we have our payment networks with all the expertise that they present, given that they are all global businesses, right? Having said that, I would like to use this opportunity to remind those of you who have to comply with PCI DSS that the current version 3.2.1, will be retired from 31st of March 2024, right? And from an IT timeline, that is literally around the corner. Okay. Now, if you are still in the process of adopting version 3.2.1 and getting it assessed, likely by CISA, and you, based on your timeline, you may or may not be able to comply with this, right? My suggestion is to work with your compliance accepting entity, right? So if you're a merchant, check with your acquirer. If you're acquirer or issuer, check with the respective payment networks, right? So don't drop anything. You know, it doesn't mean that you have to dump everything and then start panicking for version 4. Check with your compliance accepting entities. And of course, you know, CISA knows all the rules well. Do consult with your partner in CISA if there is any concern about not meeting this timeline. Okay, I think it's also timely to add that the latest discussions on PCI DSS version 4 and the other different PCI standards that we have to look after will all be discussed at the upcoming PCI event, right? So every year we host 3 events around the world, right? The Asia Pacific Community Meeting will be here in Asia Pacific, in Kuala Lumpur, right? This will be on the 15th and 16th of November. It's 1.5 days long, and everybody is invited. Now, PCI is a non-commercial organization, and we do charge an entrance fee to help pay for the event, which does cost a lot of money. Having said that, those of you who are participating organizations, you do get some free tickets, right? So either check out the PCI SSC's website for more information, both on the benefit of becoming a PO, as well as the AP community, right? Lots of information there. And if you have other questions, please feel free to look me up on LinkedIn. Mukesh.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, Yukon. Thanks for that. Thanks for that advice for us. And one last word from you, Prabhu, on this topic of how to build proof.
Definitely. I mean, Mel and Yukon have already covered all the topics, so that leaves me with nothing more to add. But I mean, just my just thought process would be is like it has to be a top-down approach. Gone are the days where we actually move from the lower layer to the upper layer. Like now, all this compliance, governance, everything has to be top-down approach because the leadership team is held accountable for any breaches. Yeah, so people have to realize that, and that culture of being compliant, being secure, aware, along with the social engineering related needs have to be put forth because people are the assets right here, where their thoughts, their assets, they are the real assets who are helping us to drive these compliance and other related needs in the play. And talking about it, definitely, I mean, Mel has already covered about all this, where the shift left approach that she was talking about, the local governance, the legal compliance is to be taken care for a better data governance because the laws and rules, regulations keeps changing depending upon your business needs that keep moving. So you have to adapt to it. And as Yukon has been rightly talking about, adaptation towards the global standards and moving towards AI is becoming more of a trend right now with respect to the data because the amount of data mining that people try to do manually, it's going to be really tough. So you really need a process or a simulation type of environment which can learn, adapt, and then give you better results, right? I'm not saying that we manually we cannot do it, but it's more like repeatable, adaptable processes are the ones which can be automated, and AI related aspects are the best tools that we could use for getting those. So please consider all this, and definitely as Yukon was talking about the compliance related needs as and when the trends are being changed, we have to keep updated with that before it's too late because the impact of it is pretty huge on the enterprise, right? The branding and the financial impacts with respect to all these rules are pretty high of late. So effectively, please adapt to that and please keep up with that trend. Yeah, thanks.
Wonderful. Thank you, Prabhu. Thank you so much for this insight. I see a lot of questions coming up. We're just over time, but I think we can take one question. All right, let's look into the questions. Okay, so there's one question which speaks about with cloud adoption becoming a trend among FIs. What are some of the key considerations that organizations need to take into account in terms of data privacy? Since data centers may be in a location different from where the data users is located. Uh, you can maybe you want to take up this question,
Sure.
resonating. Yeah.
Right. Finally, I get a fun question myself. So the adoption of cloud, and we know that this is definitely taking traction. So question is definitely highly relevant today, right? Having said that, from a PCI standards point of view, right? PCI DSS, an example, it is technology agnostic. And if you are handling payment account data, it is within the scope of PCI DSS. And we have been working with the cloud, the major cloud providers, and many of them have, they are part of the PCI community, right? And they are aware of their obligations as a provider in terms of the standard. Okay. Now, having said that, part of your question is around data assets being in different areas, right? And I know Prabhu mentioned around knowing where your data assets are stored, where is it residing and so on. And that's a key part, right? Because all of this, regardless of where it is up there in the cloud, okay, it is still part of the PCI DSS scope, right? And I guess the main suggestion here is to really work with a partner who can then transcend that boundary, because it really doesn't matter where the data stored to. You will have to comply with both the standard as well as the local regulations that are applicable, right? So in this case, it is really to find the right partner who can operate across this boundary and then support you in your assessment journey, right? So of course, we are here at the panel discussion hosted by CISA, and I know that they operate over multiple markets. So it may be a conversation to share with them more details on how exactly you're making use of the cloud, because more often than not, it will be a hybrid, right? There will be some data assets that may be stored in the cloud, some potentially within data centers that you control, right? So it will then need to be a conversation on how best to then scope. I hope that answers. Prabhu, Mel, I'm not sure if you have more perspective from your side.
Yeah, actually, I just wanted to give my perspective. So since this is cloud adoption in financial institutions, right? So because they seem to be very highly regulated, so maybe they would also want some key considerations around cross-border transfer. So I guess first is so specifically for for highly progressive organizations, there is always or most cases a cross-border transfer for any country that that runs within the scope of GDPR, or as well as of course in the US. So I guess having said that, there has to be a very strong consideration on the compliance of the requirements in terms of what are those rules that should be applied when you get to actually transfer your data, as well as what are those rules that surrounding data wherein you need to just do certain measures in terms of data localization. Then of course others around cross-border would be some challenges in terms of the data transparency. So well, it could be a bit challenging to to eventually track the movement of your data across borders. Hence, it can eventually create issues because of this vagueness. So there has to be data traceability as well as accountability. So that one should be very well established. Then, of course, the last one, which is also, some of the, I would say, a key root cause of the state-sponsored attacks would be the political and of course economic conditions. So during your cross-border data transfers, geopolitical considerations, right, should be taken into consideration. So specifically, if you are dealing with your customers, so there has to be very clear provisions around this stated in your service agreements. So I guess those are just some of my thoughts speaking from an implementation standpoint. Thank you.
Ms. Mel, thank you so much. Thanks for sharing your thoughts on this. All right, I think we are just on time, about time. I see still a lot of questions flowing in, but we'll be sure to take it up on an email separately. We'll be reaching out to you separately on an email. However, we can take up this conversation separately as well, where you can meet us in the Asia Pacific Community Meet of PCI, which is happening in KL, Malaysia on the 15th and 16th of November. I will share the list details of our booth separately. We're just waiting for the booths to set in there. But having said that, thank you so much, everyone, to all the participants and the panelists for joining in. We truly appreciate your time. Have a good day ahead. Thanks.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
It was nice knowing you all. Take care.